PBS, a service of Western Reserve Public Media.
Akron, Ohio. As the sun comes up over this large city in America's heartland, it shines a light on a city with a bright future and a rich history. The city is home to the Goodyear blimp.
The world's largest blimp takes to the air at Akron, Ohio.
And the Great American Soapbox Derby. Along with the World Golf Championship Bridgestone Invitational, and more recently, the Rubber City has become home to the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Nearby Canton, Ohio is distinguished in its own right. It's home to the Pro Football Hall of Fame and was the longtime home of U.S. President William McKinley. Now the McKinley Memorial is there to honor him. But when it comes to the television news business, both cities are too close to the Cleveland television news market to stand out. The Akron-Canton area has a lot going for it, and Akron has a metropolitan population of nearly 700,000 people. The city has a lot to offer, but there's one area where it struggles: commercial television news. For a time, Akron, Ohio was one of the largest cities in the nation without a commercial television news product. In 1996, Akron was the city where commercial television news went to black.
It is a missing piece, and it'd be hard to recover, and you know, you always hope the university and some of the businesses can somehow maybe come together and have something for Akron.
You know, the Cleveland market is held to 17 counties and more than 2 million people, 1.4 or 1.5 million TV homes. You can only give so much Akron news.
And I always said, you know, Toledo and Youngstown, these cities that are the same size, maybe a little smaller, how do they have 3 or 4 stations? I was always so disappointed that Akron never really got that competition that would probably drive it and keep things going.
If you travel the country, you go into a hotel, the first night you're there, you flip on the evening news, you get a feel for that town. You were never going to have that in Cleveland.
I did make a comment at the time that they announced that they were not going to continue to produce local news, is that if everyone who complained about that had been watching it, they would still have a local news show to watch.
It's Labor Day 2006 in Barberton, Ohio. Barberton is a suburb of Akron, located roughly 10 miles from the city. The sounds of the parade fill the air. The event celebrates the people of Barberton and the people of the Akron area. They're hard-working folk who are proud of their jobs, their lives, their families, and their community.
We just enjoy it. You know, it's kind of neat to, you know, see the small-town atmosphere, you know, and just, you know, it's just kind of neat.
This is a tradition. This is one of the large traditions in Barberton, and I can remember you know, just growing up, coming down all the time, and many times we've been in the parade. So it's something that we try to come to every year, and now we're bringing our grandchildren.
Many manufacturing jobs used to be honored at this parade on Labor Day in Barberton. At one time, nearby Akron, Ohio was the rubber capital of the world, known as the Rubber City.
First thing you smell was rubber. Everywhere you went, there was rubber. I remember people would say, "Oh, that smells." Boy, that was a beautiful smell to me. I got home to Korea, that smell was, first thing I wanted to smell was rubber.
And one of the first sights many wanted to see was the Goodyear Tower.
Well, there it is, the Goodyear Clock Tower. You've seen it so much in pictures, it's come to symbolize the rubber capital.
Now the tower chime sounds hollow as it echoes near an abandoned tire plant. You can't smell the rubber in the air here anymore because many of the tire plant jobs are gone. And now the Barberton Labor Day Parade is an event that mostly honors veterans and the community.
This used to be one of the big parades in the state. We had the governors, senators, everything was here, because this was strictly a labor town. I mean, it grew up a labor town. And it's the last 15, 20 years why labor's died out, and the parade's pretty well died out too.
There's something else missing from the Barberton Parade. There are no local news cameras. Akron didn't only lose tire plants, the city also lost something else that was key to its identity.
We need local news. We used to have it on WKR, and it died out. But we need more local news of what goes on around here, because there's a lot of things happen around here. A lot of things.
From 1996 to 2001, Akron was one of the largest cities in the United States without a commercial television news operation. That's because the only television news operation in the city, which once held the call letters WAKR but later became WAKC, was purchased, and the new owners shut down the news operation.
When I was a kid, you know, they always had Channel 23 News, and kind of always enjoyed listening to the local news, you know. But, yeah, it would be nice to have that again.
I liked it that if you knew something big had happened locally, you could always find out about it on that news station. You know, you didn't have to wait to go through 20 news stories up in the Cleveland area to get a half-minute segment on what happened to us locally, you know. So that was nice about that. If we knew that something was important going on here, we could find out instantly on that station.
But it's hard for Akron to keep a TV news operation afloat, and there are a number of historical reasons that come into play. However, when it comes to other business, Akron hasn't had a problem, and in fact has a history of economic growth and prosperity. Akron was founded in 1825 near the Ohio and Erie canals. The city's early growth was helped by its location at the summit of those canals. That's why Akron is the county seat of Summit County.
Well, when they built the canal system to serve industry primarily, getting goods to market and getting crops and agricultural products back to north, they, from Lake Erie to the Ohio River, they came through Akron. It wasn't called Akron then, but came through Summit County, and it is literally the high point on the canal. And it is a series of locks that really resulted in people stopping here.
For a time, Akron was one of the fastest growing cities in the country because of a growing rubber industry.
There was a gentleman named Benjamin Franklin Goodrich who was actually from New York, and he had purchased a company there and was not doing very well. It was making rubber products. And the story is not clear, but somehow he got on a train, took a long train trip from New York here to Akron, where there were some vacant buildings as a result of a match company that went out of business, and about 4 or 5 business owners who raised about $13,000 to loan him to move his business, literally from New York here. And that was the beginning of the rubber industry.
Here's a picture inside one of those rubber factories in 1910, when the city's population was just 69,000 people. In the early part of that decade, Goodyear began its venture into airship development. When this picture was taken in 1920, the city's population was 208,000 people.
Huge boom. We were the fastest growing city for 2 years in a row in the 1920s, when they literally sent trucks to everywhere possible, and to the south, Tennessee and Kentucky and West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania, and put out the word there were jobs here.
And right after that, in the late 1920s and into the 1930s, Goodyear focused on blimp production.
In the case of most of these rubber companies, they may have started out making bicycle tires and expanded to automobile tires and then truck tires, and then as they looked at airplane tires, and all of a sudden people were flying. So when they got into those different businesses, they saw opportunity, and Goodyear had a sizable aerospace industry that they business that they started to really respond to the needs there in the aerospace industry.
In the late 1940s, Akron's rubber industry was on the verge of a great boom. Tire companies like Goodyear, Goodrich, Firestone, and General Tire employed a lot of people in Akron, and business was thriving.
Oh yes, we build tires too.
Goodyear was America's top tire manufacturer, and in the 50s and 60s, when the automobile took off, Akron's tire industry took off with it. It was during this successful time in Akron's history in 1947 that Summit Radio Corporation and its owner, S. Bernard Burke, applied for a license to operate a television station in the Rubber City. But Burke's plans to own a television station were put on hold. In 1948, the Federal Communications Commission put a freeze on television station licenses in order to fix interference problems with television signals on the very high frequency or VHF signals across the country.
The FCC had to go back and rethink the license process because of the interference that they were encountering. One of the things that they tried to do was to come up with a relatively quick solution. But the VHF stations that were already on the air didn't want some of those things to be done. What we ended up with was a really strange system, which almost nobody agreed was good, where they mixed UHF and VHF in the same market. The result was that the UHF stations had a great disadvantage.
The FCC had decided there would be 3 VHF licenses issued to the Cleveland area, which now included Akron. Cleveland is located about an hour north of Akron, and to alleviate potential VHF interference problems, the FCC limited the number to only 3 for the entire region.
The FCC's allocation policy, the way they handed out the licenses, was based on a system of trying to make it even across the country.
There were already 3 VHF licenses issued to Cleveland with channels 3, 5, and 8. This left Akron's only TV station on a weaker UHF signal. WAKR started broadcasting on channel 49 in 1953. Being a UHF station meant the station was fighting an uphill battle from the very start.
There were 2 technological problems. The first one was that the actual transmitters they used were less powerful and covered a smaller area. And the second one was that most people who owned television receivers at that time, those receivers were not capable of receiving UHF signals. You had to use a separate converter box, which you had to buy and put on top of the television set.
A special UHF converter box like this one. Because of this, not everyone in Akron, Ohio could tune in Channel 49. But people in Akron could find out information about how to tune in Channel 49 at their local O'Neill's store. A promotion in 1953 as Channel 49 was going on the air advertised that people could easily convert their sets to be able to receive UHF stations.
Any station that was in a smaller community that was linked with a much larger community, where the signal from the station in the smaller community couldn't be received in the larger one, would have an enormous problem. And of course that was the case with the Akron station. 60 miles away, it probably wouldn't have been received even if it was a VHF station. But back in the early 1950s, as a UHF station, there was no way it would have been received.
In March of 1961, Akron Beacon Journal radio and television writer Dick Shippey wrote an article about how the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission wanted to make it mandatory for all TV sets to receive UHF signals. Shippey wrote that the majority of sets sold today are equipped only to receive the 12 VHF channels, and went on to say that absence of UHF tuners on the majority of TV sets and limited range of UHF signals causes many advertisers to stick strictly to VHF stations. According to the article, the FCC chairman, Newton Minow, felt that there could only be a nationwide competitive system if the 69 UHF channels were available to everyone. But WAKR Vice President and General Manager Roger Burke, son of original owner S. Bernard Burke, took issue with the article in this letter he wrote to Beacon Journal Executive Editor Ben Maidenberg the very next day. Burke wrote, "The vast majority of sets in UHF areas such as Akron are equipped to receive UHF. He went on to say that the average reader would assume that the majority of sets in Akron cannot receive WAKR TV. Burke saw what he called a negative article as a, quote, detriment to the station, not the fact that the station was UHF. TV sets eventually were required to have UHF capabilities in 1964, but there were other problems UHF stations faced, including network affiliation.
They found it difficult to affiliate with the, at that time, two big networks, NBC and